Penguin Random House Audio presents Yours for Probably Always, Martha Gellhorn's Letters of Love and War, 1930 through 1949, by Janet Somerville. Read for you by Ellen Barkin. Forward. Martha Gellhorn was my stepmother. She married my father after she divorced Ernest Hemingway. Martha used to tell me that her inspiration for writing a letter was a heartfelt complaint. That was her dynamo. And when she started to write it, she wrote it to someone, person to person. That way she could focus her complaint in a more direct way that didn't have a scattergun effect and dissipate the emotion in her letters. She always claimed not to be an intellectual. But there was a contradiction in her here because she loved ideas. She was also very much against what she called naval inspection, and yet her heartfelt letters often included an analysis of a relationship or the person she was writing to. Martha and I started off on the left foot. I had been airlifted from my very comfortable, seemingly successful life in Princeton, living with an aunt, to an exciting gray post-war London, where I didn't seem to fit very well. But then we had a geneticist who came to visit us at our school in Devon, and he said that we will go to a party in maybe 35 years and not know who is man-made and who isn't. The thought horrified me, and I wrote to Martha about it. Instead of saying, "Get on with your studies," she wrote right back and said, "Yes, isn't it terrible?" I replied that as far as I could see, we were living like one-eyed cyclops and Hollywood was the opiate of the masses. And in the meantime, the wool was being pulled over our eyes by a few scientists who were taking the responsibility for the future, and how dare they, and how could they, and so on and so forth. And Martha wrote right back fulsomely and with growing concern. We then cemented our friendship on anti-nuclear campaigning. She with her magnificent book, The Face of War, which in my view is the best thing she ever wrote. I went on anti-nuclear marches, which she supported avidly. This is how we became pen pals and created our friendship through letters. Her letters delved deeper into her, I think, in some ways better than her presence. She nearly always had a party face and made the best of whatever company she was in, and that served to hide away the true Martha. Only in her letters did her feelings emerge, and with gusto. She opened her heart to you, and it was a great compliment and privilege and treat to be in on such a display. It presaged affection and trust, and they were an education. I probably got more out of Martha's letters than I did out of my schooling. Janet Somerville has painstakingly put together a rich collection of Martha's letters for you, the listener, to enjoy. And then there are the replies from her friends, people who helped shape the 1930s and the 1940s. What you are getting in this book is a very articulate account of those fascinating times, not just the history, but the feelings, thoughts, and aspirations of those who shaped the history of the time. Janet Somerville has done a wonderful job. I invite you to enjoy the fruits of her labor of love. Sandy Matthews, Devon, England. Prologue. The only way I can make it seem real to me is to write. Martha Gellhorn. Reflecting back on her life as a journalist, Martha Gellhorn insisted, all I wanted to do was go everywhere and see everything and sometimes write about it. I suppose you're born with curiosity. I certainly wasn't trained. I spent my childhood riding the streetcars of St. Louis, telling myself I was going to Samarkand. All the exotic names. So I think I have always wanted to travel, and have always been curious. Writing about what she saw and heard for newspapers and magazines was her passport to adventure. She hoped, in a humble and fairly hopeless way, that something she wrote would make people notice, think a bit, affect how they reacted. The idea that her work might change minds was a stretch, but Gellhorn nevertheless believed that her words might be able to wake minds so they would know what's happening in the world. Her public self and her private self were the same, an authenticity that remains remarkable decades later. Martha Gellhorn was a fascinating, pioneering woman of her time, and her enduring legacy of words is for all time. 1. Nothing ever happens. I think one can only afford to be poor alone. Poor à deux is a disaster. Martha Gellhorn. Much to the chagrin of her progressive parents, in 1929, Gellhorn left Bryn Mawr after her junior year, only 1 year shy of her degree. She would later say of her parents, they didn't do any instructing, they just lived and were. Her mother Edna was a suffragette and a founder of the National League of Women Voters. She had a great sense of civic duty and what things should be made better. Her father George was a doctor, half of whose work was charity work, a man who cared a great deal more about his poor patients. She grew up watching two extremely generous, talented, and charming people live their lives with a moral code grounded in social justice. Her co-ed days behind her, Gellhorn got work first as a fact-checker at the New Republic in New York City. There she wrote a profile of heartthrob Rudy Valley, published in August, observing that his shy, I can't imagine why I'm here pose is tiring. She almost decided to return home to St. Louis because the New York City skyline plunged her into despair. That September, she moved upstate and took a job as a cub reporter for the Times-Union in Albany, where she covered streetcar crashes and the mortuary beat. Her first real story, never published, was about a child custody case. Gellhorn thought it would be a chance to be Don Quixote on a newspaper. She hoped her reporting might be able to direct public opinion to help the underdog. Waiting for her editor's indignation about the unfairness of the situation to match hers, she was repelled by his response that a lot of lousy middle-class muckers knocked each other around. Besides, they couldn't print the truth. The judge would haul the newspaper up for contempt of court. While on the mortuary beat for the Albany Times-Union during the winter of 1930, Gellhorn reported on the death of a prostitute in a particularly frowsy brothel on South Birch Street, on which the coroner gave a verdict of suicide. Instructed by her editor to look for marks on the body which might contradict the coroner's verdict, Gellhorn was shown the corpses of 3 women. She found herself growing cold, shaking, wanting to scream that it was all too ghoulish to be true. The undertaker showed her the woman she was there to observe, and she noted a gray Marcel bob, matted, narrow shoulders. Her breast was sore and red. Resolving that the death that the poets are always muttering about, something lovely and calm, hell, they better shut up. Back at the Times-Union office, she stayed a polite number of hours, excused herself, took a big breath, lit a cigarette, and marched off through the slush. It was in Albany that she began her friendship with Mrs. Roosevelt, a close acquaintance of Edna's through the National League of Women Voters. Her spouse Franklin was then governor of New York. Eleanor Roosevelt would become one of Martha's most intimate friends, a woman about whom she'd write, "The finest conscience in America," the most effective one, too. A woman incapable of a smallness, or cheapness, and fearless. Heroes on the whole do not stand up well to the repeated tests of time and life, but she does, triumphantly. They use the word great in America to describe anything from a toothpaste to the latest...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?